The film opens with a breaking news report about Liam McCaffrey, an international crime boss who also happens to be Dan Morgan's biological father. McCaffrey has died in prison at the age of 76. The reporter explains that he officially leaves behind no known heirs. After decades of murder, extortion, and global crime, his criminal empire is suddenly left without a leader. The story then shifts to a tense hotel setting that feels like a high-level covert operation. Jessica Morgan receives instructions over the phone to secure a package in room 556. She quietly makes her way through the building, avoids the security cameras, and enters the room. Inside, she finds her husband, Dan Morgan. What looks like a dangerous mission turns out to be nothing more than an elaborate role play for a secret date. Dan even climbed the outside of the building just to surprise her. The romantic moment comes to an abrupt end when Jessica's phone rings. It is a call from their son, Kyle, who explains that their youngest child, Max, has just thrown up on their brand new sofa after eating too much junk food. With that news, the date is immediately over, and Dan and Jessica rush home to deal with the situation. And just like that, real life takes over. This is the family plan too. The next day, the Morgan family is seen riding together in their car, singing along to music to pass the time. Kyle starts off acting bored and unwilling to join in, but eventually he gives in and sings along, caught up in the good mood as everyone else enjoys the moment. When Thanksgiving arrives, the extended family gathers to celebrate. Nenah Morgan, their oldest daughter, can only join through a video call from London, where she is currently studying. Everyone clearly misses Nenah, and the mood softens when they learn she will not be coming home for Christmas this year. Around the same time, Jessica receives a job offer to become the head athletic trainer at Ohio State. It is a huge step forward in her career, but she hesitates to tell Dan, knowing it would mean uprooting the entire family. Not long after, Dan receives his own offer, a cybersecurity job from a bank in London. He suggests that the family spend Christmas there so they can visit Nenah. All travel expenses would be covered by the client, making it a free family trip. The kids are reluctant at first, but in the end they agree, choosing to celebrate Christmas together as a complete family. When they arrive in London, the family heads straight to Nenah's apartment. Dan is caught completely off guard when a strange young man steps out of the bathroom, wearing nothing but a towel. The man turns out to be Omar, Nenah's boyfriend. Omar seems almost too perfect. He is French-Moroccan, works as a chef, excels at parkour, and even has experience as a DJ. His presence instantly makes Dan uncomfortable, triggering a mix of protectiveness and insecurity. That feeling only gets worse when Omar casually treats him like a familiar father figure. Later that day, the family goes out to explore the city together. Jessica quickly warms up to Omar and feels that he has had a positive influence on Nenah. Dan, however, clearly feels the opposite. As they spend time together, Omar shows off his parkour skills to Max and Kyle. Max is amazed and tries to copy him, only to end up falling.
Parkour! Hey!
Maxie, you all right?
Throughout the trip, Jessica wants to tell Dan about the job offer in Ohio, but every time she tries, the moment never feels right. The next morning, Dan heads to the bank to run a cybersecurity test. There, he meets a man who introduces himself as Finn Clark. Dan easily proves his skills by breaching the bank's security with nothing more than a simple RF scanner. He even exposes another weakness using just a paperclip, impressing everyone involved. But once they enter the vault, Dan senses that something is wrong. It quickly becomes clear that the entire situation is a setup. Finn is not a real bank employee, since none of the staff recognize him. Dan's suspicion is confirmed when Finn appears and shows him a photo of Jessica. Finn reveals that she has been taken hostage and forces Dan to open safety deposit box number 411. With no other option, Dan complies. Inside the box is an antique key, one that grants access to all the assets of his father's criminal empire. That is when the shocking truth comes out. Finn is Dan's half-brother. He is the son of a housemaid who was impregnated by Liam McCaffrey, then abandoned and never acknowledged. Finn has carried resentment for years, believing Dan lived a comfortable life as the recognized and protected heir. Now Finn frames Dan as the bank robber, setting him up to take the fall. Jessica is released outside the bank, but only under threat, while Finn escapes with the antique key. At the same time, police quickly surround the bank. Dan and Jessica are forced to run, with officers closing in from every direction. Finn believes he has already won, but he is wrong. The key he thinks he escaped with has secretly been taken back by Dan during their exit. Dan rushes to the hotel and escapes to reunite with his family, who are relaxing in a park with Omar. He immediately tells them to throw away their phones so they cannot be tracked, while Finn and his men continue the pursuit. Their escape leads them onto a double-decker tour bus rolling through London. The tension spikes when Finn catches up and climbs onto the bus, turning the getaway into a dangerous chase involving the entire Morgan family. On the moving bus, Dan and Finn engage in a brutal fight. The chaos grows as the tour guide audio keeps calmly explaining the history of Big Ben, completely ignoring the violence unfolding. Jessica steps in to help her husband, but Dan deliberately throws his father's antique key away to distract Finn. Seeing this, Finn jumps off the bus to retrieve it, giving Dan and his family the chance they need to get away. They take shelter inside a Chinese food restaurant where they meet Zemo, an old acquaintance from Dan's past. There, Dan finally explains the truth to his family. Finn is his half-brother, a child who grew up emotionally wounded after being abandoned and never acknowledged by their father. Dan admits he never knew about Finn's existence, yet still feels guilty about the life his brother was denied. Nenah quickly points out that Finn remains a serious threat, one who is willing to kill them. With control over the McCaffrey network of hired assassins through the inherited key, nowhere feels safe. Dan decides the only way forward is to go to Paris, the place where he spent his childhood, and end this once and for all. Omar insists on coming along, driven by his love for Nenah and his desire to protect her. Meanwhile, Finn arrives in Paris ahead of them and is welcomed by the family butler, Vikram. He clearly enjoys settling into the luxurious mansion, acting as if he is the new master of the house. With full access to his late father's criminal assets, Finn strengthens his position as the new ruler of the empire. Not long after Dan and his family reach Paris, Dan takes them in an old truck to the apartment of Svetlana, his former lover, a former Russian spy with a deep love for cats. Her beauty immediately triggers Jessica's jealousy, but Svetlana greets them warmly and prepares a generous meal. The next day, Dan arranges a meeting with Finn at an art gallery. He tries to convince Finn to let go of his ambition and avoid becoming the same kind of monster their father once was. Finn refuses outright. With complete control over their father's wealth, he has no intention of stepping aside from his path to becoming a feared crime lord. When Dan warns him to stay away from his family, it only fuels Finn's anger. In response, Finn places a massive bounty on Dan, ordering hired killers to hunt him down. That evening, Dan encourages his family to enjoy the atmosphere of Paris. After everything they have been through, he reminds himself that their original reason for coming was to take a holiday and celebrate Christmas together. When they return to Svetlana's apartment, Dan spends time chatting and drinking with her, completely unaware that his drink has been laced with sleeping pills. Svetlana has secretly sold him out to Finn for money, claiming the cost of caring for her cats is too high. But as Finn and his men get closer, guilt begins to take over. Svetlana finally confesses to Dan's family and hands over the keys to her old car, giving them a chance to escape. Dan is barely conscious from the drugs and unable to help. Jessica is still in shock and cannot bring herself to drive. In the end, Kyle reluctantly takes the wheel, attempting to drive an old manual car through the streets of Paris, despite never having driven one before.
Right pedal!
A tense chase unfolds through the city. With Jessica guiding him and Kyle relying on instincts shaped by years of gaming, they manage to survive the chaos and escape the dangerous traffic.
What do I do?
Left pedal! Sorry! Turn right!
The next morning, Dan and his family gather to decide their next move. Dan realizes the only way to stop Finn for good is to destroy the main server of the McCaffrey network, hidden inside the house where he grew up in Paris. That house turns out to be a massive and luxurious mansion, making Jessica realize for the first time just how wealthy Dan's family really was. As they plan to infiltrate through the roof, Kyle hands over a flash drive loaded with a virus capable of wiping the entire server if plugged in. Soon after, Dan and Omar move across the mansion rooftops using parkour and quietly take down a sniper on watch.
Hey, Harry.
When Finn tries to check in on the sniper over the radio, Kyle quickly jumps onto the communication frequency and responds using a recorded voice, avoiding any suspicion. At the same time, Nenah gathers her friends from an environmental organization to stage a protest around the mansion as a distraction. Police move in, believing Nenah is behind the demonstration. Seeing this, Omar causes a deliberate disturbance by smashing a car window to draw attention away from her, even though it results in his arrest. Meanwhile, Dan retrieves an old box he once hid inside a wall when he was a teenager. The box is still there, untouched, with everything inside it. He quickly takes an item from the box and pries open a window on the roof. The window leads straight into his old bedroom. For a brief moment, Dan freezes, realizing his late father kept the room exactly the same, preserving every personal belonging without changing a thing. That moment is cut short when Finn suddenly appears and aims a gun at him. Finn is ready to kill Dan on the spot, but Vikram intervenes, explaining that there is a designated room for executions. Finn and his men take Dan away instead. At the same time, Dan does not realize that the flash drive Kyle gave him has slipped and fallen in his bedroom. As he is escorted through the mansion, Dan tries to signal Jessica, but Finn notices. Finn discovers the earpiece and hidden camera Dan has been using to communicate with his family and destroys them, cutting off their ability to track him. Understanding the danger, Jessica decides to infiltrate the mansion to save Dan. She instructs her children to head to the United States Embassy if things go wrong. To get inside, Jessica has to make a daring leap between two buildings, separated by a massive gap. She gathers her courage, makes the jump, enters Dan's room, and recovers the dropped flash drive.
I still got him!
Shit. I'm kinda mad I missed it.
At the same moment, Vikram helps Dan escape by opening a drainage passage just as Finn fires his weapon. Enraged, Finn attacks Vikram and orders his men to hunt down Dan and his family. Inside the mansion, Jessica moves through the corridors until she locates the main server room. She quickly plugs in the flash drive, giving Kyle full access to the house systems and allowing him to launch the virus. At the same time, one of Finn's operatives, Tara, is already in the room. Kyle immediately warns his mother to find another way out. Trapped with no clear escape, Jessica hides inside a cabinet, but Tara discovers her, leading to a fierce fight.
Shit. Mom!
Despite being pushed to her limits, Jessica manages to overpower Tara and escape. At the same time, Dan is forced to confront Finn and his men in the underground levels of the mansion. Fortunately, Dan knows every layout and hidden passage in the house, giving him a critical advantage. Outside, more of Finn's men spread out and begin searching the area for Dan's children. The danger escalates quickly, forcing Nenah and her brothers to flee to protect themselves. Meanwhile, when Finn returns to his father's office, he immediately realizes that Kyle's virus has done its job. The main server of the McCaffrey network is completely shut down, and every piece of data tied to their father's criminal empire has been wiped out. Losing the power he had just claimed sends Finn into a rage. His anger erupts into a brutal confrontation with Dan, a clash between two brothers driven by old resentment and a fierce determination to protect family. Elsewhere, Jessica searches desperately for her children, who have fled to a playground. She finds them just as one of Finn's hired assassins closes in. Nenah and her brothers are nearly captured, but Jessica arrives in time to save them. At the same time, Dan chases Finn as he flees toward a church. Their conflict reaches its peak there, as Dan makes one last attempt to stop him and offers a chance at peace and family. Finn refuses, convinced that Dan never truly saw him as a brother. His anger intensifies when Dan points out that Finn has never had anything meaningful in his life to fight for or protect. In the end, Dan overpowers him. Helpless and defeated, Finn is left bound to the church bell ropes, a powerful symbol of the collapse of the power he once desired. When Dan steps outside the church, police have already surrounded the area. His family is also in custody, their hands cuffed, yet they look relieved and happy knowing Dan is safe. Dan turns to Vikram, who has only suffered a minor head injury. Vikram lowers his head in respect, recognizing Dan as the only true heir he fully accepts. Despite the circumstances, Dan and his family are grateful to be together again. Kyle then reveals to Nenah that he transferred all of their late grandfather's money into the account of an environmental organization, and Nenah is deeply thankful for the gesture. Not long after, Interpol arrives and officially arrests Finn, along with what remains of his network. A surprising twist follows. The Interpol chief leading the operation turns out to be Omar's father. Thanks to the Morgan family's help in exposing and dismantling one of the world's largest criminal networks, their names are completely cleared of all charges. In that moment, Jessica finally tells Dan about the job offer from Ohio State. The timing feels awkward, but unexpectedly, Dan agrees. He chooses to support Jessica's dreams and start a new chapter for their family. The film ends with a Thanksgiving celebration in the Morgan family's new home. Warmth and togetherness fill the space, signaling the beginning of a calmer life. 1 month later, Dan visits Finn in prison. He brings a Christmas gift, a coat identical to his own. In the past, Finn had been jealous of the matching coat Dan shared with their father. Now Dan offers a quiet gesture of reconciliation, showing that he truly wants to be a brother to Finn. So the moral of the story is never trust free vacations, towel guys, or long-lost relatives with antique keys.